thank you for bringing your heart, because your heart is the most important part of you that you can bring into any space, right? And so a lot of times when we come into these spaces, we come in maybe with our minds. We just want to absorb information, or we go in with our neffs and our egos. We just want to feel good right away. But it's very important that when we come into any space that we come in with our hearts, so that we can walk away with not just a mind that is full, not just time that is wasted, but a heart that is fuller. And so this topic on anxiety is a really important one, because it's a growing issue in our community. And you know, it's not just in our community, globally, right? Everyone, you hear it nowadays. Everyone says, I have anxiety, You know, it's like, it's become like, it's become something that's just very common. It's gotten a lot of awareness. But I think there's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to looking at anxiety through a lens that is in line with Islam. And so that's what I love to do. I love to take the concepts and these things that we're struggling with and filter them through an Islamic lens, so that we can understand them in a way that's pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when it comes to anxiety, it's just, you know, because it's become something so common, I think it's very easy for us to just assume we have anxiety, or to think somebody has anxiety because of certain symptoms that we see. And we know we live in a society where everyone diagnoses themselves, right? So you have people who diagnose themselves physically, right? And they think they know, you know, they go to their medical doctor and they think they know what they have. But also people are doing it, you know, psychologically. Everyone thinks they know what they have. But it's, even as a psychologist, for me to diagnose somebody with anxiety, there's certain criteria. But first, I like to ask, you know, in any class, I like to kind of get a sense of who comes to these classes and what you guys hope to understand about anxiety. So if maybe just like 3 or 4 people, if you could just tell me like what brought your heart here today and what you had hoped to gain when it comes to the topic of anxiety. And maybe we'll take 2 from the brothers and 2 from the sisters. That's 4. I said 3 or 4. Don't jump all up at once, please. Calm down. Yes. Okay, so that's what you hope to understand. Like, what is anxiety? Yeah. So do you feel it's because it's something you hear all the time that you feel like, what is it, right? Knows what it is. Absolutely. Okay, that's great. Okay, how do we prevent it from happening and catch it in an early stage? Okay, 1 more on the brothers and 1 more on the sisters. Okay. With a teenager who has anxiety? Okay, sounds good. And then 1 more on the brothers, yes. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's definitely a broader topic, but it's important, right? I mean, communication is important. How do we understand the youth? How do we talk to them when they're upset? How do we engage with them and make them feel loved and seen and heard, but also help them grow, right? So this topic of anxiety is a pretty broad one, right? So it's very hard for me to cover every single thing about it. I mean, I teach a course about it online, but I'll try to cover the main things that I really want you to take away as a starting point, okay? So first, let's talk about misconceptions about anxiety. What people assume anxiety is, that are assumptions about anxiety that are wrong. So people think that experiencing anxiety is the same as having an anxiety disorder. That's one of the biggest assumptions, okay? Is that everyone thinks if they experience anxiety, that they have a disorder, anxiety disorder. That's not true, okay? Another misconception is that people look at anxiety as just something that has to do with mental health. they don't see it connected to our spiritual health. And so for me, my work is all about connecting our mental health and our spiritual health. How is what I'm going through mentally, psychologically, emotionally connected to my relationship with Allah? So that's what I want people to start connecting, because we've separated these two areas. We've said this is my mental health over here, and this is my my spiritual health over here, right? And the reason people sometimes disconnect it is because, you know, for so long, unfortunately, we've approached mental health the wrong way, right? Where somebody who came to us with an issue with mental health, what did a lot of the scholars or people or religious people say to them? Oh, it's because you have poor iman, right? So I understand why people have disconnected talking about spiritual health and mental health, you know, because they don't want to make people feel like, okay, Allah's mad at them, Allah's, you know, that is something with their iman. But I also don't believe in going the opposite extreme. I don't believe in going in the opposite extreme where you tell people it has nothing to do with your spirituality. I don't like anything that's opposite extreme. For me, and I believe Islam is about balance. I believe that, yes, you should never tell anyone that you're going through something because you have poor iman. And you should never speak for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Never speak for Allah and say, Allah is mad at you, or Allah, you're going through anxiety because Allah is unhappy with you. So while we should not speak for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we should not tell people they have poor iman because of their mental health issues, we should also not go on the opposite extreme and say, oh, don't worry about it, has nothing to do with your spiritual health, because it does. Okay? So anxiety is not just a psychological issue. We have to connect it back to our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Thank you so much. People think that anxiety is just a genetic issue. It can be a genetic issue. Anxiety can be something that can be passed down, but it's not just a genetic issue. And then people think that anxiety is just simply because I don't have tawakkul. Same thing about what I was saying, that it's because you have poor iman. That's not always the case. It can get better with tawakkul, but it's not simply because you don't have tawakkul. Okay? So for me, I like to look at anxiety as I look at all the issues out there through a holistic lens. I want to see how an issue affects us mentally, emotionally, physically, but also spiritually. That's the priority. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a destination, right, then we have to look at everything on this human experience as a path to Him. So the question is, can anxiety be a means to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Absolutely. Can anything I go through in this path be a means to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Absolutely. So the first thing we have to understand is rule number 1, and I have to teach this in all of my classes, which is 1, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. Not we are human beings having a spiritual experience. Do you know the difference? Who can tell me what's the difference? What comes to your mind and heart when, this is a workshop by the way, so it's engaged, we're supposed to interact. So what's the difference between, you know, spiritual beings having a human experience and being human beings having a spiritual experience? Absolutely. So if we think I am a human being having a spiritual experience, then what do you prioritize? You prioritize your humanness. But in reality, we are spiritual beings having a human experience. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the temporary part is what? The experience, the human experience. The permanent part, the priority is what? That I'm a soul. So how then can I focus on my issues while forgetting who I am? You can't forget who you are. You're a soul. I'm a soul. The human experience is temporary. So meaning what? Meaning that I'm a soul in this human body going through this human experience, but this experience is going to bring me I'm going to witness so many things on this experience. Anxiety, sadness, you know, trouble, trials, tests, struggles, whatever it is, right? But eventually, what is it? The soul is passing through. So this, I cannot teach anything about mental health or struggles or anxiety without reminding my heart and yours that we are souls going through a human experience. Because then the way that you approach your struggles completely changes. If you forget this fundamental truth that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, then you know what happens? Your experience becomes your only reality. What happens to you on the human experience consumes you, instead of you knowing that it's temporary and you going through it and you understand that this is something I go through. It is not something that is who I am. And so even people, when we say, sometimes people will say I am sad, or I am, we define ourselves so much by our emotions. But emotions are something that come through, they pass through, they're not who we are. And so it's important to understand this, especially when going through anxiety. Because anxiety is something that is actually natural on this path. How many of you view anxiety as something that's natural? Okay. But you raised your hand with a little doubt. Why? You're like, yes, maybe. Okay. Right. Yeah. So I'm going to answer that in a little bit, but first I want to define what anxiety is, okay? So anxiety is a feeling of worry or nervousness or unease, typically about an imminent event or something that has an uncertain outcome. So it's any kind of unease, any kind of worry, any kind of nervousness you have about something that is going to happen, or something that is, something about, the uncertain future. So anxiety is very much associated with the future. Like depression, for example, depression is more associated with people who have depression are much more, their energy goes more to the past. But people with anxiety, it's very much associated with the future. So what's the future? The next moment, the next hour, the next week, the next year, the next months, the next few years of your life. So very key point about this definition, something with an uncertain outcome. How many times do we go through an uncertainty in our lives? Every single moment, right? So what does that tell us? It tells us that then it must be very normal for someone to have anxiety, right? So what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us in the Quran about our creation? That verily mankind was created what? Anxious. This is in the Quran, right? So what does that mean? It means that it is very natural for any of us to feel anxious. So then what differentiates between normal anxiousness and anxiousness that can impair your functioning, can make you not move forward in life, that can actually hinder your growth? It's the level, it's the intensity of anxiety. Because it's very natural for us to feel anxious as human beings, because we are always going to be dealing with what? Uncertainty in every moment. But it's the level that we have to be aware of. So, for example, Dr. Karen Cassidy, she's the president of the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, and she differentiates. She says, anxiety, feeling anxious, is a general human experience. And again, where did we hear this? Indeed, mankind was created anxious. This is chapter 70, verse 19 in the Quran. So she says anxiety is a general human experience. So she says that it's not, the difference between someone who, we all can have anxiety, and the difference between that and an anxiety disorder is the intensity and that impacting a person's life. So what does that mean? So when if I'm working with a client, what I look for is there anxiety keeping them from going to school? Is there anxiety keeping them from having healthy interactions, social interactions? Is there anxiety keeping them from going to work, going to, having, normal functioning in their lives? Is their anxiety making them sleep all day? That would something that would be a red flag for me, right? But anxiety is something that is part of the human experience. So what we have to be aware of is, how do we prevent ourselves from getting it intensified? And also, if it's at a level that's not healthy, how do we reduce it? But we all go through anxiety at different levels. Actually, anxiety can be helpful. Anxiety, for example, is what makes, they say that there is healthy good stress. There's good kind of stress. Not all stress is bad. That they say that healthy anxiety is what gets people to do their work. It's what gets people to, feel that nervousness about something that they have to do that's good for them. So the key point that I want to get across is that we can't be black and white. It's not all bad or all good, right? It's not no anxiety and then anxiety disorder. It doesn't work like that. So she says that it's feeling some, normal anxiety, so we'll call it typical anxiety or normal anxiety. She says that it's feeling some mild apprehension, maybe some physical sensations that go with it, but being able to handle it. So what's typical anxiety? You might have an interview, you might feel anxious. You might be something that has to do with a specific situation, right? That's normal. If somebody's feeling anxiety about a specific situation, that's typical anxiety, which is normal. Someone might feel anxious about something new, about a new chapter in their lives, about being a mother, about new responsibilities, that's normal. We're always going to be put in situations where we might feel anxious about something new we're going to do, uncertainty. But she says, in an anxiety disorder, that danger signal, it goes out of control. So when a person has an anxiety disorder, their anxiety is not associated with just a specific situation. It's not associated with just, I have a job or I have a new opportunity. It's something that becomes a little bit more constant. They view something so typical as a threat. When if you're standing and you see a bear, you get anxiety, right? Because you feel like your safety is challenged, and you don't know you definitely an uncertain outcome, right? You don't know if you're going to live. So definitely that's natural anxiety. But for people with an anxiety disorder, they feel those physical sensations in things that are not really a danger for them. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's just important for us to know the difference, because it's important for us, number one, it makes people feel like, okay, there's people sometimes when it comes to mental health, they think, oh my gosh, I have anxiety, something's wrong with me. But in reality, this is part of the human experience. So I teach it like this, so people don't feel like ashamed of themselves, that it's something that's part of our journey in this world, that we're going to go through uncertainty. But if the intensity of the anxiety is so high that it's keeping you from functioning, that is making you scared on things that are not supposed to be a danger, then we have to get help for that, right? So just want to start off by making sure that we're on the same page with what is anxiety, right? It's that feeling, any unease, worry, nervousness that has to do with an uncertain outcome, okay? So, and then obviously, there's a progression. So if we don't monitor it, it could get worse. And so we have to take preventative measures. And there's a lot of anxiety disorders that can be pretty detrimental, depending on the level, like OCD, someone has obsessive compulsive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. These things can really impact a person's life. So it's part of our responsibility to take care of ourselves. And it's not an Islamic mentality to say that I'm just going to focus on worship. That's not an Islamic mentality, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not negate any part of us. Meaning, part of looking at ourselves, we have to look at ourselves, our whole design that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. For you to say, I'm not going to focus on that, you're actually not taking care of a trust that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you. Allah gave you your mind, your heart, your emotions. All of these things are from Allah. But we have a habit of thinking like, emotions are nothing. Our mental health is nothing. We can't minimize something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us, right? You can't, just as we don't minimize physical health. You know, it's like if you your arm was broken, you don't say, oh, I'm just gonna pray. You don't say, I'm just gonna, you know, do more dhikr. That would be irrational. We'd look at you like something is like, what are you thinking, right? So it's the same thing when you feel like what you're going through is not, if you have a broken arm, you might not be able to do certain things. If you mentally and emotionally feel heavy and you feel the anxiety is at a level that is not healthy, then that's going to not let you do certain things either. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps those who help themselves. So it's very important to, you know, I'm glad that you guys came to this class. That's a great, you know, that's a great effort. And but also to, if you know somebody in your life or you yourself are struggling with anxiety at a level that is impairing your function, it's very important to seek out a therapist, to seek out more resources and whatnot. So what are the risk factors of anxiety? Number one, so, you know, when I say risk factor, it's very important to understand that something can play a role, but it doesn't mean that it's a direct cause, right? In research, when they do research, they say correlation, not causation, meaning like something can be a factor, it can contribute to you having anxiety, but it doesn't mean it's definitely going to happen, right? So some risk factors of anxiety. Number one, genetic behavior, genetic markers. If you have a family history of anxiety, people in your family have anxiety, you are at a risk for having it because these things can be passed down, especially if the pattern of behavior continues in the home. But there are environmental factors, and I really want to focus on this. How many parents do I have in the room? Parents. Okay, great. So this is very important for you guys because they say that anxiety is one of the greatest promoters of anxiety is our parenting behavior, right? And so they found that when children grew up in homes where the parents exhibited certain anxious behaviors, that the children are more likely to have anxiety. So it's very important for us to learn this, right? Because one of the most powerful ways in the psychology of learning how children learn is actually through modeling. They say that children do not learn as much from what you say to them as much as what they see you do. Okay? But we shouldn't be surprised because why then did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send us the prophetic example? Allah knows our psychology. Allah knows our design. He could have just gave us the Quran, read, right? But why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Because He knows our psychology. We learn through modeling. We learn when we have an example. That's actually the most powerful way someone learns. And so that is why we know in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not change the condition of a people until what? They change themselves. Why? Because if you change yourself, naturally you're going to be a model without even saying much. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ caused so much change, because more so than what he said, he modeled those behaviors. He attracted people towards him. And so it's very important because a lot of parents don't realize how much they model anxious behaviors. And they did a research, you know, on you know, like anxious behaviors. It could be like controlling parents who don't give the child any sense of like understanding that they have, you know, a choice in any matter. Of course, you have to protect your children, but I'm talking about extremes, right? I'm talking about parents who are very controlling, for example, and they don't let their child have a say. They don't let their child, they don't even communicate with their child. Like, what do you think about this? Or what do you, like, just more like I call it Pharaoh parenting, you know, like dictatorship, you know. They say that actually promotes anxiety because the child never feels like, they actually feel less secure, because what happens is later on in life, is the child going to always be with the parent? So they found that when children leave controlling parents, their anxiety goes through the roof. It might not happen when they're with the parent, but when they're adults and they're going into college and they're growing up, guess what? They don't feel secure anymore. Why? Because the parent took care of everything. I'm not just talking about dictatorship. I'm talking about oh, let me do that for you. Let me take care of that for you. Never letting the child feel their abilities. So what happens is when the child leaves the home, they never learn their own abilities, so they won't feel secure. That's very important. That's why you have, did you hear about helicopter parenting? How the generation of children who had parents who always hovered over them, do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that, never giving them a chance to see their own abilities. Like, especially in our society today, more so now than a few years ago, where parents feel like they have to do everything for their children. They actually say that promotes anxiety. Like, don't do chores. You're too little for chores. You're too little to do this. You're too little to do that. That actually never gives them a sense of having their own feeling secure in themselves. So when they leave the home, they learn that I feel secure because my parent is there. But we have to empower children to feel secure because Allah is there, not because the parent is there, right? So this is just one thing that I really like to focus on as well. And then the other thing is parental rejection. When a parent rejects a child, meaning like emotionally, right? If you, for example, don't talk to the child, don't communicate to the child, you don't make the child feel loved. And I know that, the parent, sometimes parents will come and they'll say, please, give me advice for helping my child. But I really want to stress the emphasis on the parent-child relationship because it's so powerful. It really, you model how they are going to be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there are also other factors. Lack of taking care of ourselves physically, our nutrition, what we eat. They say that also diet can promote anxiety. It's lack of exercise. They did research that said exercising and being physically fit, it reduces anxiety. And so behavioral aspects like, they say that excessive caffeine, hopefully no kids smoke, but excessive tobacco, excessive caffeine, that all increases anxiety. So you see how like anxiety is not just a mental thing. You can't just say, okay, I have to like fix myself mentally. It actually is a holistic thing. What are you eating? What are you absorbing? What are you, how are you taking care of yourself? So let's take a holistic view, okay? So mentally, when someone's going through anxiety, depending on the level, they have racing thoughts, meaning like, what is going to happen? What if that happens? All the negative scenarios that can happen are racing through that person's mind. Physically, they can feel a rapid heartbeat. They could lose breath. They could feel like just a tightness on the chest, and so that's like that's another symptom, like physically, right? Like they could feel sweating, fatigue. Sometimes people with anxiety, they could feel nausea. They could feel trembling. It depends on the level, of course. But these are things to be aware of. Behaviorally, a person with anxiety can feel restless. They can feel irritable. They can feel like they have trouble sleeping, right? Because what happens? If your mind is always racing, you're not going to get rest. Emotionally, it's fear, worry, feeling of something bad is going to happen. This is very common with anxiety. It's like this feeling like something bad is going to happen, even though there's no proof or evidence that something bad is going to happen. It's like a feeling, right? But now, what about spiritually? Do we ever ask this question when we go through struggles, mental or emotional struggles? How does anxiety look like on the spiritual path? So anxiety on the spiritual path, it can definitely play a role in the way we walk towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a two-way relationship, right, with Allah, right? It's a way that you have to understand how He is with you, but you also have to understand how you are with Him, right? And so anxiety, because it uses up a lot of mental, emotional, physical energy, it minimizes the energy we can use spiritually. A lot of times when people are anxious, they feel drained. They're using all that energy to think, all these thoughts, all these emotions. That energy that they're using, it's drained when they're walking towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it also impacts our worship, right? How do you think anxiety would impact your worship? What are some things that come to your mind? Yeah. Why do you think? Right. So she says not being able to focus in salah. Right. So because one of the symptoms of anxiety is the racing thoughts. If you are, your thoughts are always going when you're in salah, especially, by the way, if salah is the first time in your day where you are in quiet and you haven't built the muscle of ever sitting with your thoughts, if every time you're alone you have to grab your phone, if every time you're in the car you have to turn up something to listen to, you have to talk to somebody, for many people the first time that they are in quiet, it's what? Salah. So then what happens? That's when their thoughts become so loud. And then what do we usually say? Oh man, shaitan. Right? Which, true, shaitan does have a role, but we also have to look at our role. So salah cannot be the first time in your day where you actually are in quiet, because then your thoughts are going to be very loud. And so if you have anxiety, it's going to impact your salah. So a lack of presence and focus, inability to derive nourishment from prayer, and then it minimizes true connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And who do you think will maximize on your anxiety? I mentioned shaitan, right? Why? Or how? Okay. How do you think specifically anxiety though? Why do you think shaitan will maximize specifically on anxiety? Okay, so doubts, right? What are the emotions that I mentioned that anxiety is rooted in? What is the two basic emotions that anxiety is rooted in? I mentioned it earlier. Fear and worry. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the Quran about shaitan and what he threatens us with? What does shaitan threaten us with? Poverty. Wow, you star student, you have all the answers. Oh, you said it? Okay. Okay. Mashallah. So yeah, poverty. But many of us, we read this ayah probably and we're like, okay, I'm not poor, so I'm okay, right? Or or maybe we think poverty is just being poor. Before I tell you this ayah, I want to tell you why I'm mentioning shaitan. Because for me, viewing our struggles through a holistic lens means what? Means I have to look at our struggles through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because He created us. So I know that mentioning shaitan might be like, what are you saying? Are you saying that I'm struggling because of shaitan? I'm saying that I cannot ignore anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us about. Right? Because in the Quran, Allah does address all the areas of our lives. He addresses our mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual health. And so I cannot divulge, and this is what led me to this work that I do, is that when we take on a career, we divulge ourselves into what other people are telling us. But I wanted to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us about our inner world. So in the Quran, Allah speaks to our experiences. He speaks to the fact that we are anxious and we can be anxious, as the ayah that I mentioned earlier. But He speaks to our fears constantly throughout the Quran. And so shaitan will maximize on anxiety specifically. I find that this is something we have to be very concerned about. Because shaitan's biggest weapon is fear. That's his biggest weapon. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الشيطان يعدكم الفقر ويأمركم بالفحشاء والله يعدكم مغفرة منه وفضلا والله واسع عليم. Shaitan threatens you with poverty and orders you to immorality, while Allah promises you with forgiveness from Him and bounty. And Allah is all-encompassing and knowing. Another ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it is only shaitan that suggests to you the fear of his awliya, meaning his supporters and friends. So fear them not, but fear me if you are true believers. Okay? Why am I saying this? Because in the world we're living today, there's a lot of fear. Especially as Muslims, especially as Muslim youth, right? I mean, you guys are growing up in a world where social media is giving you access to every horrible thing that is existing in the world. And that is something I didn't have when I was in high school, and I always think like if I had that, I would be like, it would be a lot harder on me. But in social media, within a minute, you see every horrible thing that can exist in the world. You see the Muslim woman who just got beaten up recently. Okay, you see, the horrors that are happening overseas. So what does all that do? What emotion does that put in you? Fear, 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 fear. We also have to understand, and this goes also to the parents that are listening, we have to understand the context of what the world that our children are growing up in, right? So how many of you here are between the ages of 13 and 18? Okay. So, this message goes both to the parents and the teenagers, because we have to understand that the world we live in can also be a promoting factor. So there's a lot of fear. I mean, I know a lot of adults that are fearful. I mean, this world, we're always exposed to all the horrible things that can happen. And on the news, you'll never hear of every plane that makes it home safe. You'll never hear of every car, that every car that makes it home to someone who makes it home to their families. You'll never hear of the people who saved the day. You'll always hear what? All the horrible things that happen. You'll hear the person who got beat up, the person who got hurt, the person who got, all of these things, right? So what it does is it creates in your brain an imbalanced view of the world, where you think that horrible things happen more than good things, where you think that, oh my gosh, that you start reducing your fears, you start reducing your trust in Allah, because you think, well, it happened to this person, then it can happen, you know what I mean? It can happen to me. And so we have to be aware of the context of our times, because what we view visually is constantly impacting us. It impacts me. That's why I often take breaks from social media, because if I am just in a day, if I'm absorbing all the horrible things that can happen, then it just naturally, that's information I stored in my brain, right? But also, especially with the teenagers, there's a lot of fear in terms of their confidence, in terms of their, how you measure up. Will you achieve your goals? Will you accomplish? Will I be like this? Will I be like this person? And why? Because social media creates a world of comparison. On social media, teenagers are constantly comparing themselves. And their world is primarily online now, unfortunately. Lesser and lesser kids are playing outside. Lesser and lesser kids are having, outdoor activities, or even just activities that are not confined in the home. But now children, they want to go home and they want to be on their phone, or they want to play video games. Their world is inside. So they're not engaging in the same way. So we have to understand their world. And so there's a lot of fear, right? There's a lot of fear. Will I be successful? Will this happen? Will I accomplish this? Will I be a failure? Will this happen to me? I'm growing up as a Muslim woman. I'm growing up as a Muslim man. Are these things going to impact me? And so what we have to understand is that whenever fears come up, be sure that shaitan will maximize on this, because he will depict for you a life that looks like something bad is going to happen to you. This ayah, shaitan threatens you with poverty. We often read it and we think of material poverty, right? When we look at poverty, faqr, right? We think of what? We think of like, I'm not going to eat, I'm going to go hungry. And this is why a lot of people just kind of ignore, don't really take this ayah into account, because we think, oh, well, how's that going to happen? Or I'm not struggling with that right now. I have a good job. Even then, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could ghayar al-ahwal, but we could change the conditions, right? Materially. But poverty, we have to expand our view of it. Poverty is a loss on any level. Meaning, you can lose your sense of security on any level. Materially, financially, physically, health-wise, you could lose your health security, emotional security. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God forbid, could take somebody away that was your emotional security, right? So poverty is not just material wealth, it's any kind of loss. It's how you could lose, because think about the word poverty, right? It's you being poor. It's you being poor. Can you be poor on many levels? Absolutely. Can you lose on many levels? Absolutely. So when you have fear, I want you to be aware that shaitan will maximize on this. He will come to you and he will make you aware of all the ways that you can lose, especially when you want to have tawakkul. And anxiety requires that we build the muscle of what? Of depending on Allah. Because what did I say before? Anxiety is our unease, our worry, and our feelings about what? Uncertainty. And he answered the question earlier. We will always feel uncertain. You don't know what's going to happen in the next minute, in the next hour. This will be a constant on this human experience. So then, who is the only one we can depend on when it comes to uncertainty? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's not something, that minimizes your experience. When I talk about you depending on Allah, I'm not minimizing your experience of anxiety. I'm not saying your emotions are not important. I'm not saying that your anxiousness is because you have poor iman. Actually, you can have iman, but in those moments when you're anxious, you have to remember to depend more on Allah, so you're not vulnerable to shaitan making you fearful of all the ways you can lose. So what are we anxious about in life? Think about anxiety. It always has to do with what? Security. It always has to do with security. When you're anxious, you're afraid to lose some kind of security. Okay? When you're anxious, you're afraid to lose social security. Oh my God, what are they going to say about me? What are the people going to think? These are all things about the future. What are people going to think? What is my status in the society? If for teenagers, a lot of it has to do with, oh my God, what are my social circles going to think? Or when I post this or I don't post that, or what are they going to think about my life? So it has a lot to do with losing some kind of security. Am I going to lose social security? What if I lose my emotional security? What if I lose my financial security? What if I lose material security? So if you think about it, all our fears are rooted in a loss of security. Because why do we fear? What is fear? What is fear? If you can explain fear, what is fear? If you could define it. When you think of fear, how do you define it? Okay, so fear has to do with loss, right? Fear is when you don't feel safe or insecure, but safety, right? Security is a form of safety, but safety, okay, so can we feel fear, physical fear? Can we fear losing physical safety? Absolutely. If you're standing in front of a bear, you're going to feel fear. Can you fear losing emotional safety or emotional security? Absolutely. Fear is rooted in a loss of safety. I'm not going to feel safe. Something's going to happen to me. I'm not going to feel physically safe, emotionally safe, spiritually safe, any kind of safety. That's what fear is. You don't feel safe. So then, shaitan is going to come. No, you want to depend on Allah. No, you need to feel safe. So think of all the ways you can be safe. No, you want to get close to Allah. No, you're not. You want to wear hijab? Oh my gosh. You're not going to be safe. Someone's going to hurt you, right? Now in the Muslim world, someone's going to hurt you. You're going to lose your physical safety, right? You want to get up and pray in front of your friends. You're going to lose social safety. You're going to lose emotional safety, right? So shaitan will always come and make you feel like you're not going to be safe. You want to make sure you're going to be safe. Don't do this. So this ayah is real. Shaitan threatens you with poverty, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, while Allah promises you with forgiveness from Him and hope and bounty, right? So we have to understand the reality of this. So how can we begin to navigate anxiety in a way that empowers our relationship with Allah, brings us closer, but also addresses our mental and emotional wellness? One, we remember that anxiety is not who we are, but a natural part of the human experience. That's number one. Number two, we remember that many factors play a role in anxiety, But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only holds a person responsible for doing what is in their power. Right? Nothing else. So if you're sitting there, when I was talking about the factors, and you think, oh, well, it is in my genes, or, genetically, I have anxiety because of genetics, or, yeah, I did have a controlling parent, or I did have, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything that contributed to who you are. And it is your job, though, to just do what is in your part. And so, thirdly, we remember that anxiety is an experience, not a destination. So anxiety is not who you are, and it's also not where you arrive at. What does that mean? It means it's something that you can hold in your hands. It's something that you have to gain the power of navigating, while remembering that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the destination. And this goes for any other emotional experience. The emotion is not there to consume you. It's not there to define you. How many of you have heard of mindfulness? Yeah? Okay. So mindfulness is a psychological approach to wellness that's gained a lot of popularity. In mindfulness they say it is letting your thoughts and your emotions pass through without you giving them judgment. Okay? So meaning what? Meaning I have my thoughts, I have my emotions, they're not who I am, but I can let them pass, and I can take, I can direct them. And I don't have to judge them, meaning I don't have to sit there and say, I am bad because I feel anxiety. I am bad because I had this thought. I am bad. And this is what makes people feel worse, is when you give a judgment and you start saying, oh, Allah's mad at me. You start speaking for Allah. You start saying, Allah hates me. Allah's mad at me. Allah is, is punishing me. Or you start saying, I'm bad because I had this thought, or I'm bad because I had this emotion. The goal is to make Allah the destination. So whatever you experience internally, you take it to Him. There's a really powerful poem that I really love. It's called The Guest House by Rumi. And it's basically, he talks about how we should treat each day as like a guest house, like Beit al-Diyuf, like the place where you get visitors, right? He says, treat each day like a guest house. He said, and each day you're going to get visitors. You're going to get sadness, you're going to get happiness, you're going to get anxiousness, you're going to get all these different emotions. And then he says, welcome them all. Welcome them all because they each have a message from the beyond. Meaning, in just one day, you could have a variety of emotions. But how do we treat emotions? We say, oh, if it feels good, I accept it. If it feels bad, I can't accept it. Right? So we always want to feel good in our society. So if I feel happy, okay, good. But if I feel sad, if I feel anxious, oh no, what's wrong with me? Oh my gosh, I'm this, I'm that, I'm this, something is wrong. Somebody help me. It's just an emotion. Let it come. Just as you don't make happiness the destination, you don't make anxiety the destination either. You take it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning you recognize, and this requires that we do a lot of work. This requires that we turn inward. This requires that we sit with our feelings, not run from them. It's okay to not always want to fix and feel better right away. It's okay for you to sit and think about, what am I feeling right now? Because everything internally has a message for you. When you feel anxious, it's telling you something. It's telling you what you're afraid of. So when you feel anxious, ask yourself, what am I afraid of in this moment? What am I afraid of losing? What am I afraid of, what safety am I afraid of losing? You have to ask yourself these questions. So it requires that you turn inward and you sit with the discomfort of what you're feeling, but you don't look at it like the enemy. You don't look at it like something you have to fight. And this is the problem. This is the problem. So someone had asked me earlier, how do we communicate to our youth when they're going through these emotions, right? We don't let them run from them. We ask them questions. A lot of times parents, when their child is very little and they're upset, what do parents do? Oh, okay, I'm gonna give you, here, take this lollipop, take this, you wanna play, we try to find things to give them right away so that they don't feel bad.
This is how we've learned to view emotion. But I want to ask you something. What did the Rasul ﷺ do when he saw a boy grieving the loss of his bird? He just sat with him. He sat with him and he grieved with him. When I heard this ayah, it was one of the most powerful epiphanies for me in my work, because I was always trying to look at emotions and mental health through an Islamic, like where in the seerah and in the Quran. And when I learned about this hadith where the Rasul ﷺ sat with a boy because he lost his bird, and so much so that the Sahaba were wondering where he was because he was late, and that was unlike the Rasul ﷺ. So when they went to find him, they found that he was sitting with a boy who had lost his bird. So he was comforting him. So you had asked me earlier, someone had asked me earlier, what do I do when my child is going through anxiety? But I also want you, the teenagers, to think about yourself. What do I, how do I act when I have anxiety? Is that you learn to sit with it. If you're a parent and you see your child going through a difficult emotion, don't be so afraid of the emotion. It's just an emotion. Happiness is just an emotion. And happiness is not more valuable than sadness. We have trained our minds to think like this. We think that happiness is more valuable than sadness. That only happiness has something to offer us. But no, those moments that are sad, those moments that are difficult, they have something to offer us. And we have to learn to sit with them, because this dunya is not just happiness. Like I said, in one day, you can feel happiness, you can feel anxious, you can feel irritable, you can feel sad in one day, right? That's because emotions are just going through you. They're just as you have thoughts, you have emotions. It's very natural. But when our youth come to us and they have, especially when children are very little, it's very important to not just give them something so they could feel better right away. If your child is coming up to you and saying, I'm sad, don't just give them a lollipop or ice cream or say, okay, let's do something, or here's the iPad, or here's... You know what you're teaching them? You're teaching them to not turn inward. You're teaching them to ignore what their internal world is telling them. You're teaching them to depend on the dunya to make them satisfied. So you have to ask questions. Okay, what are you feeling? What do you think it made you feel this way? Did something happen? It's okay to sit with it. It's okay. It's okay to be sad. It's not we can't teach youth that it's bad to be sad. We can't teach them that it's bad to have difficult emotions. Because then we're teaching them that anything other than happiness is an enemy. But it's not. And we know this from the Quran, right? Where we know that we're taught just because we view something as bad doesn't mean that it's bad, right? It may be that maybe something that you think is good is bad for you, right? And it may be that something is bad that you think is bad is good for you. But also in Surah Al-Fajr, we have a wonderful example where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us an example of a man who responds to Allah blessing him and Allah testing him. When Allah blesses him, he thinks Allah has honored him. And then when Allah tests him, إِذَا مَبْتَلَاهُ رَبَّهُ فَقَالَ رَبِّي أَهَانًا, right? Like Allah has humiliated me, has disgraced me. And I remember my teacher, when he was teaching us this, he asked us, which response do you think is better? And of course we think, oh well, when he says Allah blessed him, that's a good response, right? It's not bad. But both are bad. Because we speak for Allah. We think if something feels good and it looks good, then what? Allah's honoring me. But if it doesn't feel good and it doesn't look good, then we think what? Allah's punishing me. Allah's humiliating me. Allah's disgracing me. So what we have to do is we have to approach our emotions like they have something to offer us. Like we're not going to fight them. We're not going to treat them like enemies. I love reflecting so much about the ocean. I love the ocean. And one of the most powerful things that I learned about the ocean is that, when there are tide waves, that are very dangerous for people, for swimmers, right? Like when they can really pull a person in when there's a tide wave. What's really interesting is that a tide wave, you can't really see it from the outside. Like if you're on the shore, you won't know that there's something dangerous in there for you. The ocean looks normal to you. But when you go inside, that's when you start feeling pulled in, right? And you know what they tell people? Have you guys ever seen the signs of, like, you know, at the beach, or, you know, the signs of what you should do if you're drowning, or if you're in a tide wave? Does anyone know? What did they say? Swim parallel. So usually, what do usually people do when they're drowning? What do they try to do? They try to go where? Towards the shore. They want to go towards the sand, right? They actually tell people, stop fighting the wave. Don't go to the shore. Just go with it. Swim parallel. Meaning, like, don't go towards the shore. Swim parallel to the shore. Just go with, you know, just go with the tide. Just swim with it. Because actually, people don't die from drowning. People die because they get tired from trying to fight and go to the shore. So what I see a lot of times when it comes to our mental health and our difficult emotions and our anxiety is we fight it so much. I'm not supposed to feel this way. How can I get rid of this? How can I get rid of this? How can I get rid of this? And shaitan wants you to think like this, right? Because whenever you don't feel comfortable internally, guess what comes up to the surface? Your neffs. Your neffs doesn't want you to feel good. So what does it do? Your brain is thinking of what? How do I get out? How do I get out? How do I not feel like this? What can I do? What can I do to feel better? But then your neffs is like, your brain comes back to you with no answers, right? You might have an uncertain outcome, something that you feel, oh my God, I might lose my house, I might lose my friends, I might lose any situation, anything, right? Any safety on a mental, emotional, physical level. What do? You're thinking, what do I do? How do I get out of this situation? And then sometimes what? The mind comes back to you with nothing. So then what happens? Does the neffs like this? No. The neffs is like, no, think again, think again, think again. Because the neffs does not like discomfort. The neffs does not like when you internally don't feel good. So what do? You fight, you fight, you fight. You lose sleep, you get fatigued, you lose energy. Energy that you could be using to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but shaitan wants you to feel like that has nothing to offer you. No, keep thinking, get a solution, because you're going to lose, right? So in those moments we have to remember, I need to stop fighting. This is the reality of my situation. I don't have the answers, and that's okay. Now let me go to the one who has the answers. Let me go to the one who has everything that I need and everything that I seek. And in those moments, if you ever feel so anxious and so heavy and so weighted, and you go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even though it's so heavy for you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never leave you walking away the same. He will let you walk away feeling stronger. And even though you don't have the answers, you might feel a little bit more okay with not having the answers. Meaning before you were like fighting it, right? But now you're like, no, it's okay. This is my emotion. Never ever make yourself feel bad for an emotion. And parents, never ever make your child feel like something is wrong with them for an emotion. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives examples of even the best of people who had emotions that were heavy. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the example of Yaqub alayhi salam, who's amongst the best of people, who can have such sadness, even though he was told to stop crying, but he didn't stop, right? This is an example that Allah gives us these examples for a reason. It's okay for you to be sad. It's okay for you to be anxious. It's okay for you to have your emotions. And adults, we have to model this. If we're sad and every time we're sad we're like, oh my gosh, I'm this, I'm that, I'm this, and this is a reminder to myself too. It's very easy for us to be like, I'm this or I'm that, because you don't feel like the way you're supposed to, right? But you have to model that it's okay to sit with difficult emotions. It's okay to sit with them, but take them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In psychology, in therapy, they teach people to sit with these difficult things. Anxiety will only worsen if you try to, fight it and try to think of all the ways that you can what do we do when we're anxious? Then we start thinking of all the possible outcomes, right? We start thinking of all the worst case scenarios. The only thing that I will say is it is okay for you to think, okay, well, there's a difference between thinking of all the worst case scenarios and then doing nothing, right? But then there's a difference between that and thinking of what is your worst fear, right? And trying to kind of take that fear to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's a difference. So this is the thing. So we see, subhanAllah, I think whenever you connect something to Allah, it has more value. So in psychology, they teach people that when you're anxious, think of the worst fear that you're anxious about and try to come to terms with it. Meaning like, try to be okay with it. Like, okay, like if you're afraid, say you're never going to get into this one college, right? They say like, if you're anxious about that, then say, okay, worst case scenario, I don't get into this college. And if Allah gives me this, does not give me that college, I'm okay. But don't just sit there and start creating more scenarios. What if I don't get into the college? What if my friends say this? What if my, you know what I mean? So it's about how you do things. You see how one, it consumes you, and the other one, you are in control? Do you see the difference? So whenever you feel really anxious about something, don't fight it. Figure out what your fear is and address it. What am I scared of? What am I fearful of? Because we're all afraid of something when it comes to anxiety. Whenever you're anxious, it's because you're afraid of something. You're afraid maybe you're going to lose your job. You're going to lose your security on some level. You're going to lose your friendships. You're going to lose that social acceptance. You're going to lose your image. Image is a huge thing with anxiety, especially for not just the youth, adults too, right? But in different ways. With the youth, it's more about like, how do I appear in front of my peers and social media and all of that, right? And so it's very important for you to think about, what am I afraid of? What am I afraid of my peers thinking? And why does that matter to me? You know? And so you have to stop ignoring what the anxiety is telling you and start asking questions. Start asking what it is that I'm scared of. And do the same when you are, if you are a parent and your child comes up to you and says, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling fearful. Sit with them. Ask them, what is it that they're scared of? And before you tell them what to do, just validate their experience. Because a lot of times what we do is, somebody comes to us with a difficult emotion, what do? Well, Allah says this and this is what you have to do, so you're not doing it, I'm sorry, this is why you're anxious, right? Like, okay, you want to be miserable, go be miserable. I told you what to do, right? This is, like, sometimes we just get fed up, right? Like, we just say, like, you know, a lot of times, because it comes from a good place with parents. Like, parents want their children to be the best. They want their children to be good. They want their children to listen to them. But at the same time, and we do this with our friends and our community, when somebody comes to us with their imperfection, we present them right away with what? Perfection. Well, Islam says this. But first, see the heart that just came to you. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ did. He sat with the boy in his grief. He didn't give him a lecture in that time. He just sat with him. So this is what we have to do. Sit with people. Learn to sit with yourself. The more you learn to sit with your difficult emotions, the more you will actually learn to sit with other people's difficult emotions. The more that you don't look at your emotions as the enemy other than happiness, the more that when somebody, your child or your friend or somebody comes to you with a difficult emotion, the more you'll be able to sit with them too. The more that you can ask yourself questions and turn inward and connect to yourself, the more that you will be able to help other people connect to themselves as well. So it's very important for us to develop this muscle, because we have been taught to disconnect from ourselves. This is a reality. We're always taught that, no, don't worry about yourself, worry about other people. You're going to be obsessed with yourself if you connect to yourself. This is actually not good teachings, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us tools within us that we have to pay attention to. We have to connect to ourselves so that we could listen to the tools that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us, so that we could use our mind, we could use our heart, we could use these navigation tools that Allah gave us to walk towards Him. So it's important to learn to be present and to connect to yourself as well. Also, it's important to understand that when we think of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala healing us, the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's names is Ash-Shafi, right? That He's the healer. But not just with physical Like we always think Allah is just the healer with physical, right? When people call upon this name, one of His names, when what? When they have a physical ailment, when they have a cold, when they have a, But we forget that we always need healing, all of us. All of us. We need empowerment, we need healing mentally, emotionally, spiritually, in all areas. So one of the things that is really important to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to align you with what is pleasing to Him. Ask Him to align your thoughts with what is pleasing to Him. One of the du'as I always like to make is, Ya Allah, align me spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically, holistically with what is pleasing to you. Because your thoughts, you want them to be in line with Allah. You want your emotions to be in the right way, directed to Allah. You want your spiritual health to be directed in the right way. So you have to put all of those things in His hands. And so it's important to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically in control of all of those things as well. So I don't know how many more minutes I have left, but I think I have a few more minutes. So I want to just go over some basic tips on how to manage anxiety. So the first thing is, we said that, how many more minutes do I have left? Okay. Because isn't there question and answer time? Okay. Okay, sounds good. So the first thing we have to remember is, one of the symptoms I said of anxiety is the mind, right? The racing thoughts. It's very much mentally oriented about, what's going to happen, all of these thoughts. So we have to understand then, okay, well, then I have to take care of my mind. Which then means what? It means that I have to take care of the portals in which my mind gets information. How does our mind get information? Through what? How does our mind get information? Through our senses, right? Your 5 senses are the portals in which your mind receives information. So what does that tell us? It tells us that I have to take care of this mind by taking care of my senses. What I look at, what I hear, what I absorb, who I surround myself with, right? These are all things, because what you don't realize is this brain is so powerful. It is working 24/7, collecting information 24/7, whether you are aware of it or not. And so if you're not conscious, what am I looking at? What am I hearing? How am I spending my time? Who are my friends? What are the messages I'm getting? Then trust me, that information is stored in your mind. And so if you are not spending your mind collecting information about truth, then your mind is going to collect information that is false. So where do we get truth? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us. If you don't spend your time connecting your mind constantly to Allah's truths, Allah's promises, what He has promised, what He has said about Himself, the more you're going to absorb what the world tells you this is going to happen, or what shaitan tells you this is going to happen, this is going to go wrong, this is going to, you know what I mean? So that's why, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he would get up for tahajjud, one of the main prayers is that the one where he would remind himself of what is true. Ya Allah, your promise is true, your messenger is true, your angels are true, right? Why would he do this? Because we have to remember what is real. Do you know what fears are rooted in? Illusions. What you fear, is the future real right now? No. So it's an illusion, correct? Meaning, so in those moments, when you're like in the desert and you see a mirage, I always think this is kind of like a little bit of how we are in this world. A mirage is when you think there's water, but there isn't, okay? So what do people do? They keep running towards that mirage, but when they get there, they have no water. So, but they spent the whole way there losing their resources. If they had a little bit of water, they probably used it, right? But they got there and had nothing to offer them. Why? Because they were fixated on illusion. This is how we are. We fixate. This is why it's so important to connect to Allah's truths. There is nothing that Allah did not address, right? He talked about security on all levels. He's talked about how He provides for us. He talked about how He's the one who gives sakina, right? Tranquility. He talked about how we can get security mentally, emotionally, physically. If you want to even talk about physical health, the Rasul ﷺ taught us about that. If you look at how He ate, nutrition, all of these things, right? Fill your stomach with, how the stomach is actually the root of all diseases, right? And how you fill your stomach with a third water, a third air, right? And a third, did I say food? Yeah, I forgot to say food. Food. This is why you bring your mom, so she can help you. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not leave anything out of teaching us, right? But yet we think we know better. So it goes back to a problem we have as a community. We think our deen is over here and our mental and emotional health is over here. My career is over here, my deen is over here, right? We've separated. But this deen has made everything come together through the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I understand why we sometimes do this. Especially if we're born into Muslim homes, we might take our deen for granted, right? We might think, yes, okay, I know the deen, I know Allah teaches this, I know I have to pray. And maybe even the way you might have been taught, and I'm talking to the youth, maybe the way that you've been taught about the deen is halal haram. So you never learned how to view it as a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this becomes your responsibility. That you have to work on cultivating a relationship with Allah where you see everything you go through His oneness. Okay? Meaning that my health is not separate from my spiritual health. My career is not separate from doing it for Allah. My relationships are not separate from that. So going back, then we understand that what I have to absorb, matters, because this mind is going to impact me when I go through uncertainty. If I don't connect to the things that Allah told me about, and I'm disconnected from them, and I'm connecting to the things that don't help me, then don't expect when you go through uncertainty, and you will, that you're gonna feel that strength, right? It requires a daily connection to what is real. And Allah tells us about His promises. Allah never forsakes somebody who thinks well of Him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in Hadith Qudsi, I am what my servant thinks of me. If you think Allah will come through for you, He will come through for you. If you are afraid of losing something and you really believe, Ya Allah, I know you're going to come through for me, Allah will come through for you. But you have to build that muscle of having that conviction with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the Rasul ﷺ himself has said that thinking well about Allah is actually an act of worship. I think it was one of the scholars, the early scholars, he said that Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he said that waiting for your faraj, even when you're waiting for something good to happen, you're waiting for Allah to answer your dua, is an act of worship. Because why? You're thinking well of Allah. You're thinking well of Him. So thinking well about Allah is a part of your worship. So how does that relate to anxiety? Well, when you're afraid of all the bad things that can happen, think well of Allah. Think well about Him. Direct your attention back to Him and think about, Ya Allah, I know this about you. I know that you are Ar-Rahman. I know that you are the one who provides. I know you are the one who gives security. I know you're the one who gives peace. I know you're the most loving. Connect to His names. And so the Rasul ﷺ also said, I'm amazed by optimism, the good word, the kind word, right? So there's an emphasis on anxiety about how we think about a situation. So basically, in one of the psychology approaches to anxiety, they say that it's not actually the situation that's making you anxious, it's the way that you are thinking about the situation. So for example, say you get invited somewhere and you feel anxious. Cognitive behavioral therapy will say that you don't feel anxious because of you being invited. You are anxious because you view that event as something that is a threat to your safety, right? So it might be that you feel, if I go to this event, I'm not gonna fit in, or I'm not gonna look good. I don't have anything to wear. You know what I mean? So what does that tell us? The power of the mind, of the power of your thoughts. So that means that we have to take care of our thoughts. And this is why Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, he talked about, nipping our thoughts in the bud. Let me see if I have it here, actually. Oh yeah. So Imam al-Ghazali, he said, if the first inward thought is not warded off, it will generate desire, then the desire will generate a wish, then the wish will generate an intention, and the intention will generate an action, and the action will result in ruin and divine wrath. So that thought has to be cut off at its root, right? So we can apply this to thoughts that promote any kind of dysfunction, right? And sometimes we think, I have a thought, it must be true. This is because we made the mind as the king, right? Something we almost worship. Your thoughts are just thoughts. The most important thing is, how do you act upon them? Allah does not punish you for a thought, right? But how you act to that thought, right, is what you are held accountable. So for us, it's really important to kind of, I call these moments like the rip the Band-Aid moments, or just do it Nike moments, where like sometimes you have to like just cut it off and redirect yourself to something else. Do something else, engage in something else. But don't just, entertain it. Shaitan wants you to sit there and entertain it. So what do we have to do that? We have dhikr, right? And we think, oh, dhikr, how is that going to help? When you do dhikr, you know what the psychology of dhikr is? Maybe because you've been taught to like, just, okay, do dhikr, do dhikr, do dhikr. Dhikr has powerful psychological benefits. Not just spiritually, where it brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it redirects your mind and its pathways. Do you know that in your brain, there's all these neurons, right? And every time you learn something new, your neurons are firing. Your brain is so powerful. When you do dhikr, you are actually, redirecting your brain. You're redirecting your mind. And we have Western psychology gives us techniques to do this. They say self-talk. You guys have ever heard of this? Like positive self-talk. There's all this self-help. Say positive things to yourself, which I'm not saying not to do. Those are helpful. But how come we make things like anything that Western world tells us, we're like, yeah, I'm going to do that. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to meditate for hours until I get it right. But I'm not going to work on my salah. I did it. Check. Right? Don't we do this? So this is why I have to talk about psychology in relation to our spiritual health, because we've minimized Allah's prescriptions and we've given so much value to the prescriptions that society tells us. That doesn't mean that their prescriptions are bad. They can be helpful, because Allah wants us to seek out which benefits us. So if meditation helps you and all these things help you, good. But don't ignore what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught you. When you do dhikr, you're redirecting your mind, but you're redirecting it in the most powerful ways. You're redirecting it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you say Allahu Akbar, right? Allah is greater. In a moment where you feel so overwhelmed, what are you doing? Not only are you directing your mind to the one who gives security, to the one who is in control, but you gain reward in this dunya and the akhirah. So subhanallah, how anything that Allah, like all of these things that Allah has given us has psychological, have mental, emotional, spiritual benefits. Any of these like Western psychology things, they have benefits, but when you do them in a way that is pleasing to Allah, their value increases. Like for example, now in this world, so many people are talking about the power of intentions, right? Even Oprah is talking about it, like how powerful intentions are. Make sure you set intention. Where did we hear that before? In our faith, al-a'malu bin-niyat, right? That this is something has been ingrained in our minds, but we think, okay, I get it, right? Like we think that's just something for our akhirah. And then people say, so I want you to look at this. You see how many, like when people talk about these benefits, like Oprah, when she's talking about the power of intentions and setting intentions for everything you do, she talks about that. And there's books on this now, like living intentionally. Even then, the value that they get is limited. The value we get when we set intentions is infinite. You know why? Because when you set an intention without remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what you get is based for that action. But when you set an intention for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the value of that intention transcends the time and place, even so much so to the akhirah. So when you will find that that action not only will be beneficial, but the intention you set, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards you in this world and the next. So anything that they do, we can do, but our value is greater. But we have to own our deen, and we have to feel proud, and we have to feel like nobody knows me better than the one who created me and the one who designed me. So let me look to Him. What did He tell me about my path? What did He tell me about my life? What did He tell me about the nature of this world? What did He tell me about my design? What did He tell me about, taking care of myself? What did He tell me about how to react when I'm being tested? But if we always prioritize what the world tells us over what Allah tells us, we're always going to struggle. Anxiety is always going to intensify. So we have to be aware of this. We have to be aware of prioritizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's truths over the truths of the world. So the technique that I'm talking about is positively directing your thoughts. Okay? Meaning, this requires though that you're aware of your thoughts. But what are we more aware of? I don't feel good, gotta act, right? I don't feel good, I just react. But mindfulness, you know what mindfulness actually teaches? Mindfulness says, reflect, don't react. So reflection instead of reaction. What is reflection? Turn inward, think about it. What are you feeling? Same thing what I was saying before, like asking yourself questions. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? Rather than, I don't feel good, let me fight, let me react, let me yell, let me be hasty, let me, you know what I mean? Let me jump to conclusions. So that's what we do oftentimes. It's like the person swimming to the shore. So in those moments, this is a muscle though. It's not going to happen by one time. But listen, I think that we have the ability to be patient with ourselves, just as we were patient with ourselves being disconnected, right? I remember one time I asked one of my teachers, as in the process of like tazkiyah and working on our hearts, I said, I'm still like, I was kind of getting impatient with myself. And you know what he said? He said, be patient with your heart as you were patient with your neffs. We are very patient with our neffs. We're so patient when we do whatever we want, when we don't take care of ourselves spiritually. We're so patient, right? But then when we want to change and we want to improve and we want to do good things, we think it should just come right away. So he gave me an example. He said, for the last 4 years, I've been working on just going to bed with wudu, and it took me 4 years to perfect that. So he said, that's okay. Be patient with your heart like you were patient with your nafs. This is what happens a lot of times. People, they when they come to change, when they come to do anything good, when they come to pray, I don't feel it. I increase my acts of worship, I don't feel it. I did this, I don't feel it. You have to be patient with yourself. Just as you are patient with neglecting yourself, you have to be patient with taking care of yourself. So, giving yourself time as you positively direct your thoughts. Istighfar has a really big power on anxiety. Istighfar, the Rasul ﷺ said, if anyone constantly seeks pardon from Allah or istighfar, Allah will appoint for him a way out of every distress and a relief from every anxiety, and will provide sustenance for him from where he does not expect. What's the relationship between istighfar and anxiety? These are the questions that I always like to ask. Okay, well, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, when we're always taught that istighfar reduces our anxiety, why? What's the relationship there? It's because when you are doing istighfar, what are you more concerned with? The dunya or the akhirah? The akhirah. So when you're concerned with the akhirah, 5 minutes? Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, so when we're concerned with the akhirah, you don't view this world as your only reality. Right? Our problems come when we view this world as our only reality. And you know, even in psychology, this is not Islamic teachings, in existential psychology, they say that people have anxiety and they struggle when they're disconnected from their death. Isn't that amazing? This is not a Muslim thought. This is existential psychology says that people are more distressed when they're disconnected from the fact that they're going to die. And that the more that you can connect to the temporariness of this world, the more that you will actually maximize and live this world and have less anxiety. This is why, subhanAllah, istighfar, the more you do istighfar, the more you are less anxious, because as you're not, and I'm not talking about lip service istighfar, like istighfar, astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. I'm talking about like really connecting, right? Like, you know, connecting to the fact, you know, try to imagine that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is removing your sins. Try to imagine Allah being pleased with you. Try to visualize you being in Jannah, Allah granting you Jannah, Allah being pleased with you. Think about the akhirah as you're doing it. And try to kind of prioritize that world over this world. So the more that we make this world a reality, the more that any little thing becomes a big thing. And this goes back to how I started this talk, which is what? Which is about what? You are a soul going through a human experience. You're not a human being going through a spiritual experience. You are a soul. And when this human experience is over, the soul will go on. Your body stays in the earth, right? So remember who you are. And there's a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Udhkuruni," remember me. Why does Allah say remember instead of know me? Because if I told you, do you remember me? It means what? We met before. It means you already know me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why do we do dhikr? It's called remembrance. Why? Because it's something we already know. We already know Allah. We already testified to His truth. We just forget who we are. And when you forget who you are, when you forget that you're a soul, when you forget that you're not from this world, then you will struggle. Because you're going not in line with who you are. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, do not be like those who forgot Allah, He made them what? Forget themselves. And so I'd like, because we have to go to Q&A, but before I end, I would love to give, I'd love to say this hadith that I really, really love. It's a hadith where the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said it to one of the companions when he was at a young age. And it's such a powerful piece of advice, because if the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam can say it to a companion when he is, when he is young, it means that this advice he wanted him to keep for the rest of his life, right? And it's never too early to know this. So being that I am talking to the youth, I thought it would be good to remind you of a piece of advice that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave to someone young. But I also think this advice serves us too as parents, right? And as adults, and for the parents, it's important for us to remember this as well, because we also have the same fears that our youth can have, right? We also experience fear. So the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was the companion is Ibn Abbas. Ibn Abbas reported that I was riding behind the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he said to me, and this is Rasul's words, "Young man, I will teach you some words. Be mindful of Allah and He will protect you. Be mindful of Allah and you will find Him before you. Be mindful of Allah. Be mindful of Allah and you will find Him before you. If you ask, ask from Allah. If you seek help from Allah. Know that if the nations gather together to benefit you, they will not benefit you unless Allah has decreed it for you. And if the nations gather together to harm you, they will not harm you unless Allah has decreed it for you. The pens have been lifted and the pages have dried." Allah is in full control of your life. Do not let the world tell you what's going to happen to you. Always remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the last say and the first say. Jazakum Allah khair, and we'll open up to questions right now. Oh, okay.
offer consultations. I don't offer therapy, but I do offer, if you have a matter which you want to consult, you can go to my website, prophetinstitute.org.
I accept my emotions. Sometimes it comes back to me to everything tells at the same time, and I can't really think about it.
Yeah, I need to read it again.
When I accept my emotions, sometimes it comes back to haunt me. Everything tells at the same time, and I can't really
So it's a really hard one for me to answer because I have to know the context, like what's happening there. But I think when we try to accept our emotions, just because you accept them in a given time does not mean they're not gonna come back. So again, like even the question shows how we think that like I dealt with this, I got rid of this, and it should be gone forever, right? Like the way that this question is even asked, it shows that we have the way that we view emotions is almost something like it's supposed to go away. But anxiousness can come in different periods, right? And it's not about eliminating it completely, it's about how do we deal with it when it comes up. So it's always good to remember that, say you accepted your emotions and you felt better, okay, that's great, alhamdulillah, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to come back a week from now, okay? And when it does, you try to sit with it again. So the more that you sit with it, the more that you sit with it, the more that you ask yourself these questions, the less intense it's going to be. Okay, so it takes time. Just like pain, right? Like Rumi says that the wound, when you have like a physical wound, right, in your body, he says the wound is where the light enters you. What do you do when you have a physical wound? You have to probe it first, right? You have to clean it, and then you bandage it, right? But what if you just covered it up? And you didn't clean it, you didn't probe it, it would get an infection, right? And it would go into other areas of your body, so the pain, what happens to the pain? It intensifies. So what happens to us emotionally is the same thing, is that we feel pain, so we try to cover it up. We try to hide it, we try to get rid of it, we try to run away from it. Maybe let me just be around noise, let me go hang out with my friends, let me pick up the phone and talk, instead of actually sitting with the emotion, right? Let me go get entertainment. I'm sorry. I thought it was pretty loud. Let me go and get entertainment. Let me, feel good. Let me go see a movie, right? We don't want to sit with anything difficult. We want to be distracted. But the more that you can build the muscle of sitting with these difficult emotions, the less intense it's going to be. Then you're not going to fight it anymore. So even the question which says like, I accepted it, but then it came back. It means that like, well, first I would ask, how did you accept it? That would be my first question to whoever asked this. I would ask, how did you accept the emotion? What did that look like? And when it came back, what did you do? Yes, of course. Yeah, so it goes back to positively directing. So, but I think you're talking about even behaviorally, right? Yeah. Right, yeah. Yeah. And that's an excellent point. So he's saying like, think about what gave you anxiety in the first place, and think about how maybe what was the action that caused those emotions, and to replace it. But that requires what? It requires that you listen to your emotion. If you're just going with the motions, you're not going to sit and think, you know what? I actually feel like hanging out with these group of friends doesn't make me feel good. So maybe I should find new friends. But you won't figure that out if you're just trying to get rid of the emotion, right? You have to actually listen and ask yourself and reflect. That's why reflection is so important in our faith. We're not supposed to just be going on cruise control. Muhasabah, we have to ask ourselves, how do I feel when I go to a gathering? People nowadays, they just want to like socialize, right? But for me, if I go to a gathering and I don't leave feeling nourished, I don't like that. But in our world today, it's like, oh no, let's just have fun. No, when I go to a gathering, when I leave my house and go spend time with friends, I want to feel like it's meaningful. I want to feel like when I walk away, my heart feels better. If your heart does not feel better when you go to your friends, or you go to your gatherings, or you go to your events, then ask yourself why. Yes, someone had their hand up, yeah.
You have to what? Yeah. Like, mhm. Mm. Yeah. That's a good question. Yeah. So it's like don't let shaitan maximize, but I'm telling you to sit with it. So it's a different I don't mean to it's the way that you sit with your emotion, right? When you're sitting with your emotion, I don't mean to let them take you, right? I don't mean to let them be the boss of you, right? I mean for you to sit with them and hold them in your hand. You know how when we're going through tests or when we're given risk, right? They say keep money in your hand, not in your heart. This goes with anything I think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts us through, whether it's difficult emotions or difficult experiences, whether it's a test that is easy and a test that is difficult. How do I sit there and hold it like it was given to me and look at it and say, ask the right questions? What is this telling me? How can I direct it to Allah? That's what I mean about sitting with it. But what I don't mean is you running from it. Like meaning like avoid it, let me just mask it, let me just cover it with something else, whatever it is that makes me feel good in the moment. But when you sit with it, I don't mean that you're sitting with it, letting it consume you, letting shaitan take you for a ride, right? And this is something that only you will know, right? You're sitting with it, but you're not sitting with it. It's consuming you. You know what I mean? There's a difference. So anxiety can, there's typical anxiety that I mentioned that could be associated with a specific issue, right? But for people who struggle with anxiety disorders where you're, just as she mentioned, you could be sitting with your family and you feel anxiety. First of all, I would say that I would still ask yourself, what are you afraid of? I mean, just because it's family doesn't mean that you shouldn't feel anxiety. Sometimes people are anxious when it comes to family. Why? Because sometimes family gatherings bring up things that people are afraid of. Sometimes people don't want to go to family gatherings because people are going to ask, oh, what are you doing with your life? Did you figure out what college you're going to go to? Did you get a promotion? Did you get married? Did you have your 5th kid? We're also in a culture of like, we're a culture of like, we're always thinking about the future. So we're never satisfied. So if somebody like gets married, oh, when are you gonna have kids? Someone has a kid, when are you gonna have 20, right? Like it just like we're always going next step and we treat people like this. So I would say, to this person, figure out what it is you're fearful about when you're sitting in this gathering. Are you fearful of the questions you're gonna be asked? Are you fearful because do you feel judged by your family? Do you not feel loved? And then I would say, can you communicate these feelings to your family? And if you can't, then I would say find somebody you trust to communicate these feelings. Everybody needs a space. Everybody needs somebody who makes them feel seen. The Rasul ﷺ, he made people feel valuable. He made them feel seen. We are responsible to make our siblings and our family members and parents are responsible to make their children feel this way, to make them feel like they matter. So a lot of times when people feel anxious around family, it's because they don't feel like they matter. They're scared of what the conversation's going to bring. They're afraid of like what they're going to go through. So I would say look into these things, look into what you're feeling, but also seek help. Find a Muslim therapist if you can talk to a Muslim therapist about these issues. I say Muslim with teenagers because I have a worry about like, unless you really know that therapist, you have good reviews and you know that she's not somebody who's going to sway your children or, you know what I mean, like in terms of belief systems and things like that. But I would say talk to somebody, because also when people feel anxiety in non-typical situations, it could be rooted in deeper issues. People who feel anxiety, on higher intensities, it could be because of abuse. Maybe they were verbally abused, physically abused. Remember, anxiety has to do with what? Security. I need to feel safe. So this is known in the research, people who have been abused verbally, physically, whatever, they have higher levels of anxiety. Okay? Why? Because that abuse made them feel not safe. And sometimes that abuse comes from their own families. And so then they feel anxious. Any little thing triggers them. They feel upset. They feel not safe. And so it's very important. Those things require healing. Just as you would go to a physical doctor to heal from physical issues, it's very natural to go to somebody who's specialized in that and to heal from that. And I really, really encourage adults to, like, if you went through things like that when in your own childhood, in your own upbringing, if you have trauma, if you feel like you get easily angered, if you feel you get easily anxious, and you have children, go do the work, seek the help, because it will transform your children's lives. They say that abuse and family dysfunction is something that is a cycle unless somebody breaks it. So there's no shame in being victims of, in the past, of going through difficulties, of maybe coming out of difficult upbringings, of having been physically or verbally abused, or going through difficult things. But that's not Allah does not put blame on us, but healing is our responsibility. So I'm speaking here specifically to the parents, because you have a really great role in breaking that cycle. In breaking the cycle of pain, of breaking the cycle of anxiety, of breaking the cycle of trauma. And I know, and I'm saying this because I know in our Arab culture that's not something we talk about, right? We talk about, okay, what happened, I have to just keep going, right? Survival. But it's very important for us to do the work as adults, especially if we want to impact the youth.
What do I do if I'm bullied because I'm Muslim and I can't wear the same things that friends or peers?
If you're bullied for being Muslim, you need to tell your parents and your teachers. There is a greater voice now for Muslim kids being bullied, than any other time in our lives. If you are being bullied because you are Muslim, and go to your parents, and parents, do not minimize your child being bullied. Bullying causes so much harm, okay? Nowadays, there's so many children hurting themselves because they're being bullied. And now, I don't know what is going on, but it seems like kids are more angry. I don't know if this is just like the sign of like the Day of Judgment, or, but kids are more angry, and the bullying is becoming more severe. So kids are getting beat up in very, like just ways that I don't even understand. How could children do this to other children? But you need to speak up, and parents, you need to ask your children if they're being bullied. You need to ask them how they're being treated at school. And you need to speak up for them. And I really recommend, if you know your child is being bullied at their school because they're being Muslim, I recommend you contact CARE. CARE is an organization that fights for the Muslims in this country. They have dealt with many cases of bullying in schools, and because of this is happening, right? Kids are being bullied because they're Muslim, and they go and they fight for those and they talk to the school, and they're a non-profit organization, so they will help. Never, stand by your kids and ask them if they're being bullied, and know that there are resources. It's not like 20 years ago when everyone was just like, let's just meshi al-hal, like keep going, No, now we have to, we have to fight for the well-being of our youth, Yeah, this is what worries me, is that sometimes I'll talk to the youth, and I think, this is why I'm so glad that parents came to this, because I cannot begin to tell you how many times a Muslim youth has told me that I want to go get help, I want to go to therapy, but my parents are not letting me. So on one end, I want to say that I understand that it can be scary to send your child to therapy, and it's very important to make sure it's the right one. If you can find a Muslim therapist, that is better. We have Khalil Center. If you guys heard of Khalil Center, it's in New York, but they're a great resource of Muslim therapists. It's a Muslim organization that provides Muslim therapists, and they train their Muslim therapists to cater to Muslim clients. So if your child is asking for therapy, I would go to Khalil Center, and I would give them that resource. But I also just want to say that if you are a parent and you don't want to send your kid to therapy because you're afraid that they're gonna air your, talk about things that you want it to be kept in the home, you're not helping the situation. You're not helping them heal. That means that you care more about your image than your kid's well-being. And the deen does not teach this. Arab culture teaches this. It teaches us to care more about our image than well-being. But Islam came down to liberate us from this type of thinking. That image is not the most important thing. That doing what is right in front of Allah is the most important thing. And then if you're a child and you feel like you are, you're looking for therapy, I would say talk to another Muslim, someone who's, who you feel you respect, who's someone you could talk to your parents about it.
How do you feel getting advice from a person not agreeing or understanding?
Like, how do you deal with when someone gives you advice and you don't accept it? I mean, you didn't accept it, so I don't know. I think it's important to assess why you're not accepting it. Is it because it's an ego thing, like you feel like they're judging you or they're shaming you, or you feel like you don't look good in front of them, or is it because you really feel like they don't understand your situation? If you feel like they don't understand your situation, then go to somebody and talk to them about your situation. And seek other help. But don't be discouraged just because you didn't get the advice that you wanted. Don't let that keep you from continuing to seek help.
How do I know if my teen is suffering from mental health issues? I'm very distant from them, trying to reach out to them.
So that's, okay, so that's really hard because the teenage years, I know that teenagers tend to kind of want to isolate from parents. They don't want to tell them. I think the most powerful thing that a parent can do when their child is distancing themselves is to let them know that you're there, even though they're not ready to talk to you yet. Let them know, I'm here. I know you don't want to talk, but I'm here. I love you no matter what. Don't make your love conditional, number one. So they know sometimes children fear that if they tell their parents something, their parents not going to love them anymore. So remind them of your love. Remind them that you're always there for them. Remind them that you are there for them when they're ready to talk. Just let them know that you are not there to judge or to shame, especially for our teenagers as they're getting older. We want to start treating them as, you hold that space for them, right? Because there's a period when there is that point where you have to discipline, right? But there's a period where you have to hold the space so they could actually bring you those things and tell you about them, so that you could have the opportunity to tell them what you want them to do. So I would say hold for them a space. Don't shame them. If they tell you something is wrong, don't make them feel like something is bad with them. There's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is okay, right? It's to feel bad about an action. Shame is when we make a person feel bad about something, make them feel like something is wrong with them because of the action. So always focus on the behavior, not the person, right? If you really want them to come to you and to seek advice. But I think it's just a lot of patience is required. I mean, many parents struggle with this during the teenage years where they feel they can't talk to their kids. There's just a lot of sensitivity because they're figuring out who they are, and they also feel like their parents don't understand. And this is actually very normal psychologically. In the development of psychology in the teen brain, the teenager actually has a heightened sense of of self, and as they're developing their identity, and they also think it's actually a psychological phenomenon where they think they have all the information, right? Because their brain is expanding during that time. And so just to kind of understand where they're at, but hold a space for them. They should know that you are there for them when they need you. Oh, you're giving. I thought you meant you had a question. Sorry. Oh, for the time. Okay.
Are there any things that can help stress and internal methods that will help?
Yeah, so I think exercise is a really big one. Exercise, when you're active, it actually releases, good hormones. It reduces cortisol levels. Cortisol is a stress hormone in the brain. When you exercise, it reduces that. It releases endorphins, which is, a relief kind of hormone. It makes you feel better. Being out in nature, I think being out in nature is so calming. Because it teaches you how to be present, but don't always go out and have something to listen to or be distracted or be on your phone. Really just find a place that you love in nature, sit there, walk a lot, go surround yourself with Allah's beauty, and reflect and think about His creation. And these things bring calmness to the soul, I think, caring more about connection rather than just being connected. So we think we're all connecting just because we all are Facebook friends or social media or whatever. Value connection. That's different. When you're with somebody, be present. When you're with somebody, meet with people who make you feel nourished. Find a halaqah to go to. Find meaningful gatherings where you feel like you are being nourished, where you feel like you're doing something meaningful. Busy yourself with work that you love, that you feel like you're doing for the sake of Allah. That's really important. The more that shaitan, they say an idle mind is the devil's play, right? The more that you are not engaged in work that you feel is for the sake of Allah, shaitan will keep you busy with things that are not helpful. Just like that person chasing the mirage, right? Chasing the mirage, until you get there, it offers you nothing. So engage in things that are meaningful. Wherever you're at, whatever role that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in your life, find meaningful work. Be present with that work. And then just take care of yourself. Take care of what you absorb. Take care of your engagement online. If you're spending half of your day online absorbing news article after news article and post after post, that's all clutter in the mind. Also take care of your spaces. They say a cluttered space is a cluttered mind. Your homes, like, make sure you have a space, even that's just in your house, that you feel that's where I go and organize. It's clean. These things impact your mental and emotional wellness. So there's so many things. Also, salah. Many times people. One of the exercises that I do with my students, and also you asked about resources. So what I do is right now I teach a program online. It's a transformation program where you basically are learning the knowledge, but you're doing the exercises, and then you also get one-on-one time with me. So it's education that's supported by consultations. And so I create courses and programs that allow people to interact with the material and to apply these things. So one of the exercises I have my students do is, when they make their schedule, for the day, when they write what they have to do, I tell them to start with the salah times. So you're creating a mindset that not my salah revolves around my day revolves around my salah. And that already creates a mindset that Allah is a priority. And even in my own life, and from what the students say, when the days that they do that are completely different than the days that they don't. So any day it's about taking it day by day. Any day that you revolve around Allah, you'll find that whatever you put second to Allah, He takes care of. He makes easier. Whatever when you are in prayer and you remember and you want to rush to something, but you say, you know what? No, I have to pray. I'm going to focus on my prayer. You'll find that when you leave that prayer and you go do that thing, Allah makes it easy. So making Allah first, prioritizing. And then after you put in the salah times, then you fill in the things that you have to do. So that's a technique that I can give you that I find to be really powerful, not only in my own life, but in the lives of those I work with. How we approach them, yeah. Oh, really? That's fun.
Absolutely. And you know, this is something that's not stressed in our society, because what do we tell people nowadays? Like, you know, the more that we get aware of mental health and self-help, I feel like the more I have to navigate, because I look at these concepts and then I say, okay, what fits with Islam and what doesn't? One of the greatest issues that I find in the way we talk about mental health and self-help is you do you. Put yourself first. Boundaries, you got to put boundaries, right? And boundaries are really important, don't get me wrong, but we have strayed away from that. So when someone is struggling, they say, no, me first. I have, you know, but they actually don't know the power of going to give charity in a time you're struggling. In a time that you are, you know, when you, like, for example, subhanallah, like, I'll give you an example from my own life. There are times when, like, you know, say like I'm going through something, right? And then somebody else comes, just because of the nature of my work, somebody else comes and they're like, they have their own issue, right? And sometimes I'm like, I don't want to go. I'm like not in a good place, right? But subhanallah, those times when I go for the sake of Allah to help somebody, even though I'm struggling, I find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps me through that encounter. So we have gotten away from connection. We think that we've become so isolated, you know, everybody's in their own world. But there used to be a time where, you know, in Arabic we say ulub ala ba'daha, right? Like that the hearts are like connected to one another, or upon, you know, literally it's like upon each other, but connected, right? Thinking about one another. We don't have that much anymore, right? When, you know, there was a video recently about this woman. Did you guys see it? It said "My Face of Islam." She was on Oprah. It's like going viral now, right? Yeah, it's something so powerful. This writer, her name is Elizabeth Gilbert. She's a famous author in the U.S. She was in Indonesia, and she would take this daily walk on this island that was really poor. She said so poor that when she says when I say poor, I mean that the people would eat the fish that they caught that day. That's how poor it was. She said, but every day I would take a walk and I would see this Indonesian lady. But she said, one day I got so sick that I didn't take this walk. I was so sick. And imagine, you're alone in this new country, you don't speak the language. This Indonesian lady came and found her. And she said, I started crying. I fell into her arms and I started bawling like a baby. Because what? This woman noticed her absence and went to find her. She said, this woman, by the way, she tells Oprah, she says, by the way, she is my face of Islam. Meaning when I think of Islam, that's what I think of. But this is our deen. You know, people are struggling with anxiety, depression, and in all these issues in isolation. Because il-ulub are not with each other. We don't ask about that person that didn't come to the halaqah or didn't come to the masjid. We don't ask about people. You know what we ask about? Where are you in your life? Did you buy that house? Did you get that car? Did you get that career? Did you go to med school? Did you have kids? Did you get married, right? But we don't ask, how is your heart? How is your heart? And I'm not saying not to care about those things, but start with the heart and find out what your brother and sister needs. You know, if you know your friend or someone in the community is struggling financially, ask them about that affair. Ask them how you can be of help. If you know somebody who isn't married, ask them, how can I be of help? How can I be of help to help you with this, right? But instead, we don't ask about people. We don't ask about what they're going through. And I'll leave you with, and oh, by the way, this is your fault, because you got me thinking about all of these things. But you know, Umar ibn al-Khattab, you know, when he was a Khalifa, and after he gave out the zakat, they would come back and they would say, there's no, you know, all the poor were fed, right? And they would have extra. You know what was the next order of business? Go find those who aren't married and get them married. What does this tell us? He was concerned about the affairs of people. And this goes to everything. If your sister is struggling with something and you know about it, if you know there's a convert in your community who is alone on Eid, reach out. These things, this isolation is what promotes anxiety, depression, all of these things. If you know there's a new person in your masjid, get up and greet her. If you're sitting in a circle, make way. If you're in Taraweeh and you see people come in, make people feel included. Community is supposed to heal people. It's not just, therapy is not the only way, you know? So, yeah. Yes.
99%. That's mm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah. They have made it legal in some states. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, remember how I said that people use different ways to cope, right? When they can't sit with their emotions, they try to avoid it. Some people use food to feel better. Some people, they keep going until it doesn't work. Some people use distraction, entertainment. And so it's going to get higher when whatever they're using is not making them feel better. So drugs are a fast way to make people feel good, right? And so it starts with awareness. It starts with us teaching people different ways. I don't think, though, it's 99%, but I do understand your concern. I think that it is a growing issue, and I think even Muslims are starting to be like, oh, it's not a big deal, the youth. But I think we need to keep teaching people how to use different mechanism and to address their emotions rather than go and numb them. Because that's what drugs are, right? They numb so you don't feel. That's what it is. So we have to teach people how to feel, and that feeling is okay, and that numbing is not okay. But I can't address the whole drug issue today. Jazakallah khair.
We want to thank Sister Dr. Marwa Assar so much for her knowledge today and the beneficial lecture that she gave. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward her and reward all of you for coming and listening, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us among those who listen and apply, inshaAllah ta'ala, and transfer the knowledge that we learned to other and apply it with other, inshaAllah. Qulu ameen. That's the most important. We welcome our brothers from North Hudson Islamic Center, Brother Kamal and his youth. Jazakumullahu khairan. Keep in touch, inshaAllah. And now, inshaAllah, we're going to pray Salat al-Isha.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
استقيموا استقيموا رحمكم الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قال اهبطا منها جميعا بعضكم لبعض عدو فإما يأتينكم مني هدى فمن اتبع هداي فلا يضل ولا يشقى ومن أعرض عن ذكري فإن له معيشة ضنكا ونحشره يوم القيامة أعمى قال رب لم حشرتني أعمى وقد كنت بصيرا قال كذلك أتتك آياتنا فنسيتها وكذلك اليوم تنسى وكذلك نجزي من أسرف ولم يؤمن بآيات ربه ولعذاب الآخرة أشد وأبقى أفلم يهد لهم كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون يمشون في مساكنهم إن في ذلك لآية لأولي النهى منها خلقناكم وفيها نعيدكم ومنها نخرجكم تارة أخرى. الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي أهانن كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين
وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جما كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفا صفا وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يتذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي فيومئذ لا يعذب عذابه أحد ولا يوثق وثاقه أحد يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي. الله. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله الله أكبر. الله الله أكبر. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On behalf of the administration and on behalf of you, I thank the sister and the sisters who and the brothers who made this possible. Tonight's lecture was indeed a valuable one that dealt with issues of depression and anxiety and how that is alleviated by making dhikr. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those who make dhikr and who make dua. May Allah bless them and bless all of you. Jazakumullahu khair.
Assalamu alaikum. And outside over there is a bake sale to help the youth program. So please buy something.